"You fucking weasel," she whispered. Not loud, not theatrical, just enough for the mic to catch it, just enough to shatter the illusion. Then, without flinching, she reached into that worn red folder. Her hand didn't tremble. Her voice didn't rise. But what she pulled out made a sitting president blink like a man seeing his own obituary. She placed it on the desk, one sheet of paper. The signature at the bottom, Donald J. Trump. And in that moment, 42 million Americans realized this wasn't an IQ debate. This was a reckoning, live, on air, uncensored. But to understand why a single sentence could collapse the myth of a presidency, you have to go back 3 days. To when the match was lit and the country mistook the fuse for a ribbon. It started, these things often do, with a smirk and a microphone. Trump stood before a bank of cameras, tie too bright, grin too wide, ego inflated like a blimp over a burning city. He didn't just throw down a challenge, he detonated it. If she beats me in this IQ showdown, I'll resign the presidency. Right here. Right now, I'll walk. Laughter, cheers, shocked gasps from pundits who suddenly had their weekend ratings saved. It was supposed to be theater, a stunt, another distraction in a news cycle built like a carnival ride, loud, bright, spinning in circles. But Trump made one fatal mistake. He challenged a woman who doesn't blink. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to say a word. She didn't tweet, didn't go on MSNBC. She didn't throw counterpunches or cut promo videos. She just let the country talk itself into a frenzy while she sat still in the eye of a storm she'd quietly engineered. Because the truth? This wasn't about intelligence. It was about arrogance. And Trump, God help him, couldn't resist his own reflection. The stage was set 2 nights later. Not a debate stage, not really. No moderators in tweed, no honest clock. Just a gladiator pit lit like a Vegas showroom, framed by red, white, and blue LED panels, as if democracy was just another pay-per-view event. Trump entered to a standing ovation, spotlights bathing him in gold, the presidential seal gleaming behind him like a throne. He waved once, didn't smile. He knew this was his terrain, spectacle, sound bites, showmanship. A fight he thought he had already won before the first question was asked. And then she walked in. Jasmine. No entourage, no pre-written lines, no smile. Just her and that red folder. She took her seat, a full 3 inches lower than his by design, and looked up at the cameras like she wasn't just watching the circus. She was timing the collapse. He opened with jokes, taunts, boasts about brain scores in elite schools, and very stable genius nonsense. He called her a tweeter, a low IQ radical in a designer blazer. He turned the room into a coliseum. The audience howled. The moderator chuckled. It was a feeding frenzy, and she was meant to be the bait. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She watched, calculated. Every laugh was another rope around his neck. What they didn't know, what not even his aides knew, was that while Trump obsessed over trivia questions, Jasmine's team was quietly tracing pension funds diverted from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Names were disappearing, files being sealed, executive orders quietly removed from the Federal Register. And every thread led back to the same place. A Cayman bank account, a ghost firm, and a familiar signature. She had everything. But she waited, because timing isn't just about strategy, it's about justice. 35 minutes in, Trump was high off applause. He leaned into the podium like a preacher mid-sermon, grinning at the camera. "Think America's seeing who really belongs in charge," he said, voice thick with syrup and smugness. And that's when she moved. No fanfare, no microphone grab, just a whisper. "You fucking weasel." The room stopped, not because of the words, but because of what followed. She opened the red folder, pulled out a single sheet, and placed it on the table between them like a knife at a dinner party. One page, one signature, dated, sealed, direct, and unmistakable. Donald J. Trump, authorization of the executive order that rerouted over $127 million in federal pensions to a private contractor with ties to his family trust. Trump blinked, his jaw locked. The camera zoomed in, uninvited, hungry. Viewers at home leaned forward. The live chat exploded. Hashtags were born mid-sentence. Silence wrapped the room like fog in a battlefield. And Jasmine, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't rise from her chair. She just looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a man who brags about surviving without anesthesia. Quiet, precise, holding the scalpel. That moment, clean, quiet, undeniable, was the rupture. Not with a shout, but with a document. Not with rage, but with receipts. And as the lights flickered and Trump's hand curled around the podium like it was the only solid thing left in his crumbling empire, the nation realized something no poll, no scandal, no tweet had ever made them feel before. He wasn't untouchable. He was cornered. And Jasmine Crockett, woman in the lower chair with the smaller mic, with the folder no one had bothered to search, had just made the most powerful man in the world look small. Not with noise, but with truth. And she wasn't done. She didn't blink. Not when the crowd erupted for him. Not when the moderator leaned toward her, fishing for a soundbite. Not when Trump, chest high, chin higher, turned toward her and smirked like a schoolyard bully who thinks he's just humiliated the quiet kid in front of the whole cafeteria. Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, legs crossed, one hand resting on that frayed red folder like it was a loaded weapon. And in a way it was. That folder wasn't for decoration. It wasn't symbolic. It was strategic. Inside, lined in chronological layers like a forensic autopsy, were files scraped from closed servers, screenshots of transactions never meant to be seen, archived orders pulled before deletion logs could bury them. Jasmine didn't carry chaos. She carried proof. Proof of betrayal, of theft, of a quiet war against veterans and civil servants too forgotten to fight back. But the audience didn't see that. They saw silence and assumed surrender. They saw stillness and assumed defeat. They didn't realize they were mistaking restraint for retreat, an error as old as power itself. Trump saw her motionless and thought he'd won the room. And maybe, for a few minutes, he had. He played to the optics like a virtuoso, called her slow, nervous, unprepared. He weaponized charm like a blunt object, pounding the idea that real intelligence was fast, loud, dominant. And Jasmine let him. Because she knew something Trump didn't. Smart isn't how fast you talk. It's how long they remember what you said after you're done speaking. She didn't need a rebuttal. She needed timing. Backstage, her team sat rigid. Her comms director, Isla, whispered through a headset, "They're cutting her lighting again." Marcus, her lead policy advisor, scanned the live feed. "They just delayed her mic input by 3 seconds. They're trying to make her look lost." Jasmine knew this was coming. She had planned for it. The game wasn't fair, but it was familiar. Power always bends the stage, but truth doesn't need a spotlight. It only needs a heartbeat. And hers? It was steady. That folder wasn't just filled with documents. It was filled with names. Veterans who'd been quietly removed from medical benefits, teachers whose pensions had vanished under the label of asset reassignment, soldiers who came home from war only to find their records scrubbed, their trauma categorized as data points for budget reallocation. The Executive Order 421A had been deleted from the federal archive, but not before one of Jasmine's aides captured the full PDF. And what lay inside was damning. Clause C7, temporary restructuring of inactive federal pensions into privately managed financial assets. Authorization, Donald J. Trump. Beneficiary, Aegis Liberty Defense Holdings. Location, Cayman Islands. Eric Trump. Every line, every signature, every dollar rerouted, not to the people, not to infrastructure, but to a shell company wrapped in patriotism and camouflaged as defense. Jasmine had held that folder for 11 days. She hadn't shown it to the press. She hadn't leaked it to sympathetic anchors. She hadn't weaponized it online. Because she wasn't after the trending moment. She was after the truth heard in silence. And now, as Trump puffed out his chest and said, "She's been real quiet tonight," makes you wonder if she even came prepared. The room laughed again. Even some of the cameras shook slightly, as if the operators were smiling. But Jasmine, she moved one finger, a slow slide across the folder, not opening it, just reminding the world it was there. and the energy changed. Slight, almost imperceptible, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air turns metallic and the trees go still. Trump didn't notice, but Marcus did. Isla did. And the people watching at home, the ones who had seen enough false confidence to recognize real control, felt it in their bones. Stillness is not weakness, it's calculation. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett was calculating everything. The room temperature, the camera angles, the pacing of the crowd, the volume of applause. She wasn't passive. She was precise. Let him throw punches. Let him mock. Let him mistake the silence for surrender, because she wasn't there to out-talk him. She was there to bury him, with receipts. Trump turned again. "I'll be honest," he laughed. "I thought this would be more of a fight, but it looks like she left her courage on Twitter." Roars, chants, theatrics, all loud, all hollow. And Jasmine, she sat back slightly, just enough for the camera to catch the corner of the red folder peeking out. Just enough for the nation to wonder, what's inside? That was the moment everything turned. Not when she spoke, not when she rose, but when America began asking questions before she gave answers. And Trump, still blind to what was coming, smiled like a man in a house already on fire. Because by the time she did open that folder, he'd realized the match had been lit long ago. And he'd been standing in the gasoline the whole time. By the time the curtain rose, America was already watching, not just out of curiosity, but hunger. The kind that comes from too many lies too often told, from too many polished men in perfect suits promising to fix a country they barely recognized. So when the networks cut to the stage and the seal of the presidency shimmered under the stage lights like a prize in a rigged game, the nation didn't lean in to witness truth. It leaned in for blood. The set was obscene, massive, glowing, almost holy in its artificiality. The floor pulsed with LED veins, red and blue, like someone tried to make democracy look like a nightclub. Flags stood on both sides of the screen like well-trained soldiers, perfectly still, equally ignored. At the center, raised by a half-foot platform, surrounded by gold trim and a camera that never blinked, stood Donald J. Trump. He owned the stage, or so he thought. He walked out to the roar of a hand-picked crowd, donors, insiders, loyalists dressed like Sunday morning at Mar-a-Lago. He waved once, then planted himself behind a podium engraved with the presidential seal and his name beneath it in gold filigree. A lion in his den, a king in a court that he believed was built for him. His mic was hot, his lights were warm, his smile, it was practiced, sharp, cocky, smooth as deception. Then came Jasmine. No music, no cheers, no light bump. She simply stepped into frame, quietly, the way someone might enter a funeral they didn't want to attend but needed to finish. Her podium was shorter, her chair lower, her microphone thinner, quieter, barely adjusted to her voice. Behind her, no seal, no flags, just shadows, and the red folder. Always the red folder. She sat, legs crossed, expression unreadable. Her fingers gently pressed against the top of the folder, like she was holding down a secret that might detonate if left unattended. The crowd didn't cheer for her. The cameras barely followed her. She wasn't cast as the challenger. She was cast as the prop. The one meant to be mocked, controlled, broken. The moderator stepped forward with a grin like a pageant host announcing a final round. Not a legal scholar, not a statesman, just another face built for ratings. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight we separate brilliance from bravado." He turned to Trump. "Mr. President, ready to show America the size of that IQ?" Laughter, applause. Trump chuckled, rolled his shoulders back, tapped the mic like a stand-up comic about to deliver the punchline of his life. "Let's do this," he said, smooth as sin. But Jasmine, she didn't move, didn't even glance at the moderator. Her eyes were fixed on the back of the room, somewhere beyond the noise, beyond the lights, watching, measuring. Trump opened the match like a boxer showboating in round one. "She's had a whole week to study," he smirked. "Maybe she finally learned how to spell IQ." More laughter. A chant started. "IQ, IQ, IQ." The crowd howled, but Jasmine, still motionless, Still quiet. Still holding that red folder like a priest holding a sealed confession. Trump answered questions like a man born to perform. Quick, cocky, rehearsed. Each answer met with bursts of applause, curated smiles from the audience, applause signs flickering in the dark above their heads. Cameras cut to his angles perfectly. Lighting flattered him, shaded her, and then the pattern revealed itself. When Jasmine spoke, her mic lagged. The delay wasn't accidental. Her answers, sharp, thoughtful, sounded hesitant because the tech made them stumble. The crowd muttered, "She's nervous. She's freezing." They didn't know they were being manipulated. They didn't know this wasn't a debate. It was a setup. But Jasmine knew. She always knew. She wasn't there to win a point. She was there to watch the whole machine expose itself. Every time Trump mocked her, every jab, every sneer, she let it stack, like weights on a trap door. Every taunt made him feel bolder, louder, invincible. And that's exactly what she needed. Because power drunk on its own applause never sees the cliff coming. At one point, he turned to her and said, "You know, Jasmine, you've said a lot about justice, but tonight, you've said nothing at all." And she smiled, just barely. Not because it was funny, but because the timing was perfect. Because stillness is not absence. It is preparation. And her silence wasn't all empty. It was loaded. Trump mistook the lights for armor. He mistook the crowd for protection. He mistook the cameras for control. And Jasmine? She didn't come to fight him on his stage. She came to burn the stage down. Not with rage, but with truth. And beneath her fingertips, that folder pulsed like a heartbeat. Not yet, not yet. But soon, the audience was still laughing when the crime started to unravel. Trump had just finished tossing another insult across the stage. Something about Jasmine needing a lifeline just to spell IQ. And the crowd roared as if comedy had just conquered character. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Her smile was small, surgical. The kind of smile a prosecutor gives the defendant right before they reach it under the table and pull out a smoking gun. The screen behind them glowed bright, still looping through IQ trivia graphics, colorful diagrams, and buzzers like this was some twisted game show. But 40 feet behind the curtain, in a room colder and quieter than the circus outside, Marcus was watching something else entirely. A government page blinked, then blinked again, and then it was gone. "Wait," he muttered, leaning closer to the monitor. "That can't be right." He refreshed the page, blank. He checked the archive link, redirected. He checked the timestamp log. Executive Order 421A had vanished from the Federal Register. Gone. Not expired, erased. Backstage, Isla's voice broke the tension. "They're scrubbing it, live, while we're on air." And Jasmine, without even turning her head, nodded slightly, because she expected this. She had planned for it. That's why the red folder never left her lap. That's why the printouts were backed on 3 mirrored drives and sealed in a fireproof envelope. Because she knew they'd try to bury it, but she came ready to dig. 421A wasn't just another dry piece of bureaucratic policy. It was a trigger mechanism, a carefully disguised financial bomb built into the language of restructuring, optimization, and strategic reallocation. What it really meant was this: tens of thousands of dormant federal pensions, veterans, teachers, retired postal workers, had been reclassified as excess liquidity and funneled into private defense-linked investment firms through backdoor authorizations. In plain English, the government stole their money. And Jasmine had the receipts. She didn't need a podium. She didn't need applause. She had math. While Trump kept grandstanding, saying things like, "I've built towers that touch the sky, and she's barely built a resume." Marcus was pulling up the wireframes behind EO 421A. The money didn't just vanish. It moved. Through a firm called Aegis Liberty Defense Holdings, registered in Delaware, funded offshore, and conveniently left out of any official audit trail. In Aegis, it wasn't a defense firm. It wasn't anything. It was a paper ghost. No employees, no history, no board, just a name and a single Cayman Islands account. The red folder shifted in Jasmine's lap. Not much, just enough to tell the world, it's time. She tapped the desk once, gently. That was the signal. Upstairs, Isla activated the sequence. On screen, the IQ graphics froze. There was a flicker, a pause. Then the feed changed. Gone were the trivia questions and cognitive metrics. Now on screen, VA Retirement Fund Transfer Timeline, EO. 421. Underneath it, a flowchart. Cold, stark, lethal. Arrows in red move from federal pension holdings to privatized domestic instruments. Then again, from Holding Group Alpha to Aegis Liberty, Cayman account. The total, $13.2 billion. The crowd stopped breathing. Trump turned, slow, like a man trying to convince himself the fire behind him was just special effects. Jasmine stood, quietly, deliberately. Her voice didn't rise. It just cut clean. This is not about intelligence, she said. It's about invisibility, about how power hides theft inside language so sterile, so technical, most people never think to question it. She lifted the first page from the folder. Executive Order 421A wasn't archived, it was deleted. Because what it did wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. It authorized the redirection of federal pensions to a private firm with zero public oversight. She held the paper higher. The camera zoomed in. The name on that signature? Donald J. Trump. Trump stepped forward. That's not what this is about. This is a trick. It's misdirection. Jasmine didn't blink. This isn't about you looking stupid. She unfolded the second page. It's about who you thought would never look. On the screen now, a Treasury Office metadata verification. Date, 6 days before the executive order vanished. Note, transfer authorized under Emergency Fiscal Redirection Clause. Destination, Red River Capital. Holdings, intermediary, Aegis Liberty. Trump's face stiffened. The room felt smaller. Jasmine kept going. You didn't just sign away policy, you signed away people. Veterans, retirees, Americans who served this country, who kept their promise, even when you didn't. And then she said it, quiet, low, but loud enough to ring through every feed in the country. You didn't think anyone would check the routing go. She dropped the next page onto the table like a guillotine blade, and the screen went black. Not because the broadcast failed, because the system had no more answers. Only names. And one of them was Eric Trump. The screen had gone still. The audience had gone silent. The only thing moving now was the heat crawling up the back of Donald Trump's neck. He could feel it. Something shifting. Something slipping. Jasmine Crockett was still standing. Still calm. Still holding page after page from that red folder like surgical blades. The room wasn't a stage anymore. It was a courtroom, and she had just placed the first exhibit on the table. Executive Order 421A. Signed, sealed, dated. The camera lingered long enough for America to read it. There was no escape hatch, no punchline, no cute deflection that could soften the impact of raw evidence. And still, she hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't moved with fury. She moved with precision, because fury clouds judgment. But precision ends careers. Backstage, Marcus was breathing fast, eyes locked on the financial trails. Lines of code, currency flows, offshore aliases. He clicked, scanned, froze. Jas, he whispered into the mic, check the routing code. Her hand paused mid-turn. Say that again. The Cayman stream, third layer. Follow it all the way down. She flipped to the transaction sheet, the one the public was never supposed to see. Line 27, routing code ending in 9901. Marked consolidation account. She didn't recognize the name immediately. Silverburn Equities, vague, generic, but she'd seen the number before. Months ago. A redacted DOJ whistleblower file. Anonymous, unverified. Until now. Her voice came soft, almost a murmur. Gala, cross-reference 0404738109901. Tag Silverburn. Run it through Treasury leaks and international financial disclosure logs. Gala's reply came in a whisper. Oh my God. A pause, then confirmation. It's him. Jasmine didn't need to ask. She already knew. Eric Trump. The crowd still sat frozen in the tension. Trump, standing rigid, squinted like he was trying to read the end of a story written in a language he never bothered to learn. The arrogance that once danced across his face was slipping, inch by inch, replaced by something older, colder. Fear. Jasmine took her time. She picked up the page, stepped forward. This routing code, she said, pointing to the number in red, traces to a dormant trust. Cayman-based, shielded behind a chain of shell companies. Silverburn Equities, Coral Sands Holdings, and Red River Strategic. She looked out over the crowd. Those firms don't build anything. They don't employ anyone. They exist only to move money, quietly, legally, invisibly. She held up the final page. And this one, this account, belongs to a private trust filed under the name Eric Frederick Trump. The silence that followed wasn't just still, it was crushing. Trump's mouth opened, but nothing came out. This wasn't a talking point. This wasn't a conspiracy. This was a routing code. Woe digits that connected a sitting president's executive order to his own son's offshore wealth funnel. Trump found his voice. Barely. This is a setup. You don't even know what that code means. People move money all the time. Businessmen do business. Jasmine didn't blink. Not with stolen pensions. She stepped closer. This isn't a mistake, it's a pattern. 421A gave your administration the cover to reroute billions. Billions meant for veterans and retired federal workers into a privatized structure with no oversight. That money didn't get invested, it got buried, washed through shell firms and funneled into a family trust in the Caymans. And it ends here. She tapped the signature again. Signed by you. Then flipped to the next page. Benefited your son. Trump started to speak, but the words didn't form. The moderator glanced at the producer's booth. No cue, no lifeline. Only screens now flashing the words. Cayman account identified. Eric Trump linked to 421A. Veteran funds tied to Trump Family Trust. The screen behind Jasmine updated. Marcus had uploaded the path in full. One clean visual, one chain of movement. The arrows weren't abstract, they were brutal. Federal Pension Pool, Aegis Liberty, Silverburn Equities, Trust, Missouri 447-381-991. Eric Trump. No gaps, no metaphors, just money, just blood, just names. Jasmine stepped back. Let it breathe. This isn't about politics anymore, she said. It's not about IQ, it's about integrity, about accountability, about what happens when the most powerful man in the country signs away the futures of those who fought for it and hands it to his son like a goddamn inheritance. Trump lunged for the mic. It's fake. It's yours, she snapped, fire breaking through steel. Your name, your ink, your betrayal. And with that, she laid the final sheet on the table. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Because in that moment, the room wasn't looking at a president. They were looking at a criminal. And America had just seen the routing number that proved it. He stood slowly. No spotlight, no camera cue. Just movement. Deliberate, heavy, human. 1 second, the audience was frozen in disbelief, eyes still glued to the routing code Jasmine had revealed. The next, a lone figure in row 3 began to rise. He wore a navy jacket, pressed, plain, no decorations, no stars. Just one silent symbol pinned above his heart, a folded American flag lacquered beneath a piece of protective glass. He didn't wear it like an accessory. He wore it like a wound. No one told him to stand. No one expected him to. But the moment he rose, the room changed. A veteran doesn't need to announce himself. The posture says enough. The scars say more. Jasmine saw him immediately. Her breath caught, not in surprise, but in memory. Sergeant Alan Bridges, 19 years of service, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, diagnosed with chronic PTSD and spinal nerve damage after surviving an IED blast outside Fallujah. 6 months ago, he testified in a closed-door veterans oversight hearing. Nervous, shaking, voice hoarse from trauma. Jasmine had sat across from him, listened, promised she'd remember. Now, here he was, not behind a desk, not in a clinic, but standing silent at the edge of America's most watched stage. No camera moved toward him. No lighting shifted to catch his face. Whoever controlled the feed tried to pretend he wasn't there. But the room knew. The nation watching at home knew. And most importantly, Trump knew. The former president's eyes flicked toward him. For the first time that night, his bravado cracked. Because Sergeant Bridges wasn't a journalist, wasn't a politician. He was a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. Bridges didn't say a word. He walked down the aisle, slow and steady, boots echoing against the chamber floor, not stomping, not threatening, just deliberate, unstoppable. The crowd parted like it had rehearsed it 1,000 times. No one dared block him. Jasmine stepped aside. He reached the center table, the place where Trump had stood, proudly, arrogantly, sneering down at anyone who dared question his integrity. Where Jasmine had laid out the red folder like a prosecutor's case file, where millions of Americans had seen routing codes, signatures, and bank transfers. But Bridges brought something else. He didn't place papers. He placed history. From his inside pocket, he pulled a velvet case. Small, black, worn at the edges. And then, with the kind of reverence reserved for funerals and flag-folding ceremonies, he opened it. Inside, gleaming under the lights that no longer felt warm, was a purple heart. He didn't raise it. He didn't present it. He simply removed it and laid it down on the glass table, right in front of Donald Trump. No ceremony, no speech. Just the weight of sacrifice landing like a verdict. The clink was soft, but it rang like a gavel in every heart watching. Trump flinched, not visibly, but inwardly, like something inside him recognized he no longer controlled the air in the room. Bridges didn't look at Jasmine. He didn't look at the moderator. He locked eyes with Trump, and what passed between them was not rage. It was disappointment. It was betrayal forged into steel. It was a man who had seen death, faced fire, and come home believing he'd earned peace, only to find that the man he once called commander-in-chief had sold it off behind his back. Still, Bridges didn't speak. His silence said enough. But the room, heavy and reverent, needed a voice. Jasmine stepped forward again quietly. She didn't touch the metal. She didn't explain it. She simply placed one page beside it. A printed screenshot of the VA system rejection Bridges had received 3 months prior after Executive Order 421A redirected his benefits into a pending audit queue. The date on the letter matched the date on Trump's signature. The weight of it all pressed down like thunder in a sealed dome. Jasmine's voice was soft. This man didn't ask for pity. He asked for medication, for care, for dignity. And he was told, without notice, without warning, that his file was undergoing review due to a restructuring event. That event was this. She gestured behind her. The screen updated again. Now it showed a list of redacted veteran IDs, tens of thousands, flagged as inactive pension assets. Bridges' ID was the first one on the list. The rest scrolled behind him like names on a war memorial. The audience didn't make a sound. Not the loyalists, not the press, not the staffers, because grief has gravity and truth has temperature. And in that moment, nothing burned hotter than what had just been laid on that table. A medal, a man, and the money that was stolen from both. Trump took a step back, blinked. And Sergeant Bridges? He simply nodded once. Not at Jasmine, not at the room, but at the nation. Then he turned and walked back to row 3. Boots steady, shoulders straight, like a soldier who had delivered the final order. Remember me. And this time, no one dared look away. The medal still sat on the glass. The echo of Sergeant Bridges' footsteps had barely faded when Jasmine reached into the red folder one more time. Not fast, not dramatic, just deliberate. A quiet shift of breath moved through the chamber, the kind of sound people make when they know what's coming is not for applause, but for reckoning. She didn't speak right away. She looked down at what she held, creased, slightly curled at the corners, folded so many times the paper had memory. Not an official document, not stamped, not notarized, just a handwritten letter. Ink faint in places, words trembling like they'd been written by hands that no longer knew how to steady themselves. She unfolded it slowly, then glanced at the room, not to check if they were ready, but to see if they were willing. And then she began to read. You don't know my name. You never shook my hand, but your signature erased my life. The room stopped breathing. I served in Fallujah, 2 deployments. I lost 2 fingers and 1 lung. When I came home, I was told I'd have care, that there would be someone on the other side of the war. Instead, I got wait lists, paperwork. Silence. Jasmine's voice didn't break, but it lowered, like she was reading at a gravesite. 3 months ago, my PTSD meds were cut. I was told the system was undergoing reallocation. No one called, no one followed up. The dreams came back, the screaming, the shaking. My daughter asked why I couldn't hug her anymore. She paused, her eyes wet but still locked on the page. You didn't just steal my benefits. You stole my will to live. A sob broke somewhere in the crowd. No one turned to look. So tonight, after I finish this letter, I'll leave the front porch light on. I want my wife to find me in the living room. I want her to know it wasn't her fault. It was yours. Jasmine's hand trembled now, but the words didn't stop. You never pulled a trigger, Mr. President, but you signed in the paper. You flipped the switch, you turned patriotism into profit, and you called it leadership. I hope someday when your war is over, you have to explain this to someone who still wears a uniform. My name was Matthew K. Delaney, and I used to believe this country saw me, until you made me disappear. Jasmine folded the letter with both hands like it still had breath left inside. Then she laid it beside the Purple Heart. Trump stood frozen, hands gripping the edge of his podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The color had drained from his face. The moderator didn't speak. He didn't move. He looked like a man watching a building collapse and realizing he was still inside. No one clapped, no one dared, because some moments aren't made for noise. They're made to be felt. Jasmine looked up. Her voice was soft, but it landed with the weight of a nation's grief. This letter isn't a political stunt. It's not theater. It's not strategy. It's a man's final record of betrayal, a soldier who gave his body, his mind, his years, and was rewarded with silence, with reclassification, with cost-cutting policies dressed up as reform. She turned back to Trump. You didn't just rob the country, you robbed it of sons, of fathers, of voices that still echo through folded flags and unfinished dreams. You told them they mattered. Then you erased their names from a spreadsheet. And then she stepped back, not because she was finished, but because the truth had taken the room hostage. Because a single letter from a dead man had done what no document ever could. It made corruption personal. It made it hurt. A woman in the back row quietly wept into her sleeve. A staffer turned away from the camera. One of the stagehands backstage, former Army, sat down on the concrete and buried his head in his hands. Trump tried to speak, a word, maybe a phrase, but his lips just formed shapes with no sound. His mic was on, his platform elevated, his suit still clean. But in that moment, he looked small. Not because someone outsmarted him, not because Jasmine had landed a rhetorical knockout, but because the thing he thought was buried, the facelessness of his victims, had now stood, spoken, and finally been heard. And no spotlight in the world could compete with that kind of truth. The letter sat on the table beside the medal, 2 relics of pain, of patriotism, of promises broken in ink and blood. In America, it didn't move, because something holy had just happened. And for the first time in a long time, silence wasn't manipulation. It was mourning. The letter still sat on the table, curled at the corners like it could feel the weight of what had been said. The medal hadn't moved either. Together they formed a kind of altar, a reckoning built not from religion, but from receipts, loss, and blood. Jasmine Crockett didn't touch either again. She didn't need to. She turned toward the screen behind her and tapped once on the podium. The next slide appeared. Flow of funds, VA pensions to Silverburn equities. Q1, Q3 timeline. No introduction, no narrative, just raw clinical visuals. Boxes and arrows, highlighted transfer dates, dollar amounts etched into digital steel. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every new slide was a blade, and the room had already started bleeding. Trump shifted behind his podium. He tried to wave it off. Charts don't prove anything, he scoffed. You can make numbers say anything if you spin them right. Jasmine didn't respond. She advanced to the next slide. Asset migration summary, 421A transaction tree, 127,400,000. Redirected. This one was simpler. A central bubble marked VA Federal Pension Reserve, branching into 4 arrows, all ending in one name, Silverburn Equities, Trust, number 0447-381-9901. Owner, Eric Frederick Schrump. The audience was stone. Not quiet, stone. Hardened, still. Holding their breath like each dollar amount carried its own obituary. Trump snapped louder now. That's not mine. You're twisting this. I don't control my son's financial holdings. That's not how trusts work. That's not how any of this works. Jasmine finally looked at him, not with fury, with discipline, with precision. She turned to the third slide. Verification document, routing code confirmation, Cayman Authority, seal April 11th, and underneath it a scanned memo from an overseas auditing firm. Notarized, stamped, digitally time verified, confirming the connection between the trust, the shell firms, and the order of dispersal from Executive Directive 421A. Still, Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She only asked one question. Mr. Trump, why does a Trump-linked firm hold $127 million from a federal pension pool marked for disabled veterans? Trump froze. The moderator flinched. No one answered. She repeated, slightly firmer, still poised. Why does your family's trust receive money reclassified under your executive order, then rerouted to an offshore holding company your own son controls? Trump's mouth opened again. That proves nothing. But Jasmine didn't argue. She advanced to the next slide. Signature log, EO 421A, amended memo, Feb 14, highlighted in red, authorized by Donald J. Trump initialed DJT. She let it sit, then spoke again. Same even tone, same unshakable cadence. Explain this signature. Trump turned toward the moderator. This is a setup. I didn't sign that. That's probably doctored. You people fake things all the time. Jasmine tapped again. Blockchain timestamp verification, DOJ, chain of custody. Filed February 15th. Received March 1st. Public chain code displayed into the corner. Undeniable. Immutable. Explain this signature. Trump looked at the crowd now, at the lights, at the cameras, but they weren't props anymore. They were witnesses. This is all political, he shouted, but his voice cracked. It's theater. No, Jasmine said, her tone sharper now. Theater is what you did for 40 minutes before I opened this folder. This is cross-examination. She stepped closer, not confrontational, methodical. The way prosecutors walk when they know the verdict is already starting to settle in the jury's spine. You can call it a coincidence. You can call it strategy. You can even call it smart business. But what you can't call it, not anymore, is an accident. This isn't speculation. This is not opinion. These are numbers, and they go exactly where your ink told them to go. Another slide, this time just one line. White text, black background, nothing more. You signed the order. You built the shell. You buried the money. And under it, silence, no more interruptions. Trump stood still, pale, eyes twitching, his lips quivered with a retort he couldn't find. And Jasmine, she asked one last time, soft now, almost a whisper, explain this signature. And this time, he didn't say a word. He didn't know when he started sweating. Maybe it was after the third time Jasmine asked him to explain his own signature. Maybe it was when the routing code flashed across the screen and never went away. Or maybe it was earlier, when the metal hit the table and he felt the room begin to shift, not toward her, but away from him. But now the sweat was visible. Not glistening, theatrical sweat. No, this was the kind that betrayed you. That pulled under collars and made foundation run. That soaked through presidential blue and settled into the silk like it had always belonged there. Jasmine hadn't moved. Not a single dramatic gesture, not a raised voice, not even a finger pointed. She hadn't opened the red folder again. And still he was unraveling. The cameras, once flattering, now lingered too long. The angles were crueler, the lighting too honest. Someone had forgotten to dim the harsh whites and replace them with the usual amber hue that kissed his jawline like a halo, and the sweat kept coming. Trump tugged his collar, shifted his stance, gestured at the moderator, hoping for relief, for structure, for someone to throw him a rope, but there was no lifeline. The moderator's eyes stayed fixed on the screen behind Jasmine, which now displayed one sentence in large block text. Document 421A, Financial Crimes Unit Assessment Pending. Pending, that word hit harder than guilty, because pending meant active, ongoing, real. He tried to laugh, reflex, instinct, but it came out dry, croaked. A noise, not a sound. His hand moved to the mic like it always had in rallies, ready to spin, to banter, to control the tone. But the mic didn't obey him this time. It stood still, cold, recording. And Jasmine? She sat like a surgeon between incisions, calm, unblinking, watching the patient twitch under the light of truth. The audience no longer reacted to him, not even his diehards, because something in the air had changed. The game they came to cheer for, the gladiator spectacle, the IQ showdown, the viral clash, they now realized was real. And reality has no applause breaks. Trump spoke again. This whole thing is a sham, a setup. She's reading from papers her people forged. I've never even seen that memo. And even if I had, this is nothing. You want to talk about crimes? Let's talk about Biden's laptop. But his voice cracked on laptop. A single bead of sweat ran down his temple, traced along his cheek, and disappeared into his collar, like the truth swallowing the last thread of image control. No one flinched, no one followed him there, because what used to work no longer worked. He reached for water, missed the cap, fumbled, hands trembling now, not visibly, but just enough to register, enough for someone at home to lean forward and say, "Wait, is he okay?" But Jasmine didn't flinch. She tapped her screen again. The next slide appeared. Comparison Executive Order 421A versus DOJ Financial Forensics Report. Signature match, 96.4%. No sound effect, no dramatic sting, just data, verified, sourced, time-stamped. Trump's eyes darted to it, read it, tried not to react. But his mouth moved before his brain could stop it. "That's a lie," he whispered. And no one believed him, because now his voice sounded like what he had never allowed it to sound like, small. The power was gone, not because someone had taken it, but because someone had pulled back the velvet curtain, unplugged the spotlight, and exposed him for what he was without the machinery, a man. And now that man was sweating. He wiped his forehead, then wiped again. The cloth came away soaked. Jasmine still hadn't stood. She looked at him once, not with hate, not even with contempt, but with something far more dangerous, certainty. And in that gaze, every illusion he had ever built, of dominance, genius, invincibility, began to collapse under the weight of one undeniable truth. Optics don't matter when the light turns cold. And tonight, under 1,000 unblinking eyes, the illusion finally froze. It was always going to end like this, not with a gavel, not with a walk-off line or a dramatic curtain drop, but with a rupture, pure, undeniable, unpolished truth, breaking through every carefully built illusion and leaving only the raw, ugly core exposed. Trump had run out of weapons. His jokes had curdled. His slogans felt dated, hollow. Even the deflections, the Biden's laptop, the witch hunt, the fake news, all of it now echoed like reruns from a decade-long scam that the nation was finally tired of watching. And so he did the only thing left. He shouted, "This is a setup!" He roared, voice cracking, chest heaving. "She's lying! This whole thing is a smear campaign! I did nothing wrong!" His hand slapped the podium. And for the first time all night, Jasmine Crockett stood. No rush, no fanfare, just a silent, rising motion, like a blade lifting from its sheath. The room reacted before she even spoke. Cameras swung toward her. The feed director instinctively zoomed in. Somewhere in the control room, a producer whispered, "Don't cut away. Don't you dare cut away." because everyone knew this was it. She looked at Trump, not across the room, not from the side, but directly eye to eye. Her stare was blade-edge cold, unblinking, and terrifyingly calm. Her body didn't shake. Her hands didn't clench. The rage wasn't visible. It was contained, tempered, deadly. And then she said it. Not screamed, not spat, just spoken. "You fucking weasel." The room snapped. It wasn't a bank bob. It wasn't scandal. It was release, because every veteran in the crowd, every mother who had watched her child's benefits disappear, every American who had seen their dignity traded for campaign cash, they knew. And Jasmine didn't stop. She took a step forward. "You gambled with soldiers' lives for a yacht and a tax dodge." The words landed like stone fists. Trump tried to speak, but the crowd wasn't listening. The audience, once divided, once electrified by drama, now surged into something unified. Not applause, not protest, but vindication. People stood, people pointed, people whispered, "She said it." Not in outrage, but in awe, because someone finally had said what they all knew, that it was never about IQ, that it was never about leadership, that it had always been about greed, about cowardice in a suit, about one man using a flag to disguise his own rot, and one woman refusing to let him hide anymore. Trump shook his head, eyes wide, lips moving, but forming no sound that could survive the moment. Jasmine walked around the table now, slowly, methodically. "You call this a setup?" she said, voice rising just enough to carry. "No, Mr. Trump, a setup is when you hide the order, erase the routing trail, build 3 shell firms under your son's name, then reclassify $127 million of veterans' pensions as liquid repositioning." She pointed to the screen. "That's not a setup. That's premeditated theft." She pointed to the red folder. "That's not hearsay, that's your signature." And then she pointed to the flag and the letter still sitting on the table. "And this isn't politics. This is a man who died because you couldn't stand to pay for the care you promised him." Trump leaned against the podium like it might collapse with him. She looked at the audience, at 40 million people watching live across the country, and said crystal clear, "This isn't about me proving I'm smarter than you. This is about proving you were never worthy to lead them." And then, silence, no need for more. The truth had been spoken, and for once it had no competition. The moment Jasmine sat back down, the room didn't return to normal, because there was no normal left. What had started as a televised IQ debate, marketed like a heavyweight showdown, a spectacle for ratings and algorithms, had become something else entirely. A courtroom, a tribunal, a reckoning. And the defendant was still standing at center stage, sinking under the lights that now exposed everything. And then the screen changed. No more charts, no summaries, no polite graphics. What appeared now was raw, blunt, unfiltered. The first image, a Wells Fargo transaction sheet, dated, signed, traced. $42.8 million moved from a Department of Defense discretionary account to a private intermediary shell named Red River Holdings. Attached was a short note. Confirmed per EO 421A. Priority, expedite for Cayman authorization. The signature at the bottom, Jared Kushner. Trump flinched. Jasmine said nothing. The next slide, a redacted email chain. Top line visible. From Jared K at whitehouse.gov to Wi-Fi Trump at coralsandsintel.com. Subject line, need final sign-off before Friday wire. And underneath, the damning phrase no amount of spin could explain. Make sure Dad doesn't see the routing slip until Monday. Gasps didn't ripple through the room this time. They thundered. Because this wasn't a conspiracy board. This wasn't partisan smear. This was a timeline. Slide after slide began to scroll like a slow, unstoppable avalanche. A financial forensics audit from Citadel Compliance Group showing over $127 million flagged as unaccountable federal pension reallocations, matching to shell accounts tied to Trump family trusts. A side-by-side signature comparison showing 3 matched initials, DJT, JF, ET, with blockchain timestamp confirmation logged through DOJ's internal ledger. A leaked voice memo, audio now playing softly through the speakers. Trump's voice. If we move it fast enough, the vets won't even notice. I'll bury it under reallocation language. Hell, half the press can't spell fiduciary. The sound bite froze the room. Trump turned pale. His hands went to the mic, then stopped. Every instinct screamed to respond, to spin, to pivot. But there was no stage left. No script. Only the truth and his receipt. The camera cut to the audience. Veterans stone-faced, journalists frantically typing, one congresswoman silently crying. No one spoke, because what Jasmine had detonated was no longer a debate. It was a public dismantling of the Trump financial machine, a spiderweb of shell companies, fake boards, and reclassified assets, all leading to one thing: theft in a suit and tie. Trump stumbled forward. That tape, that's not real, he barked. That's AI, that's deepfake. I never said that. But the next slide already countered him. Metadata analysis verified by AI forensics. Task force audio integrity, score 99.96%. Speaker confidence. Donald J. Trump. Confirmed. He looked toward the moderator. Nothing came. The man had removed his earpiece. His shoulders slumped. The producers behind the curtain no longer whispered in his feed, because no amount of moderation could salvage this. This was no longer content. This was evidence. And America was watching in real time as an empire of lies collapsed. Jasmine sat still. She didn't smile. She didn't raise a fist. She knew better than anyone. This wasn't victory. This was surgery. The kind where you cut out something rotten, knowing the body still has to survive the trauma. One more slide. The final one. Federal charges recommended. Pending review underneath. In red, fraud, embezzlement, abuse of executive authority. Trump stared, his lips moved, but there were no words, because there was no more room to lie. And the truth had finally taken the microphone. There was no music, no campaign jingle, no defiant fanfare, no exit soundtrack to mask the sound of power collapsing under its own weight. Only silence, and the scratching of a pen across paper. The desk was empty now, no red folder, no medal, no theatrics, just one sheet, one line. One man hunched forward, signing his name not with defiance, not with pride, but with a heaviness that bent his spine lower than any scandal ever had. Donald J. Trump resignation letter. Effective immediately. The nation didn't cheer, they watched. Because this wasn't a moment of celebration, this was a surgical transfer of gravity. The weight of shame moving from the people who carried his lies back onto the shoulders that birthed them. Behind him, the monitors still flickered with evidence. Emails, bank wires, offshore trusts, voice recordings. Not in motion anymore, just still images, frozen exhibits. The kind future textbooks will publish without needing to explain context. Jasmine sat silent. Her eyes didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She watched like someone witnessing an earthquake finally go still. Not victorious, just finished. The moderator spoke for the first time in nearly an hour. Mr. President, for the record, is there anything you'd like to say before the cameras shut off? Trump didn't look up. For a moment, he didn't move at all. The pen sat still in his hand. His lips parted slightly, dry. But then, almost to himself, too quiet for theater, too honest for spin, he whispered, "She didn't beat me with brains. She beat me with truth." Then he stood. No applause, no salute, no final wave. He stepped away from the desk slowly, shoulders tight, eyes low. Not from shame, perhaps, but from exhaustion. The long performance was over. The mask had cracked, and now there was nothing left behind it but a man who gambled on power and lost to the very people he underestimated. He walked off camera. No exit line, no flashbulbs, just an open door, and a nation that would remember. The cameras remained still. The resignation letter lay on the glass desk, the ink still wet, as if it were waiting for the rest of the country to catch up, to realize what had just happened wasn't a twist ending, but a slow, methodical unveiling of rot. And Jasmine, she stood only after he had gone. She walked to the desk, looked down at the letter, not with triumph, but with the full awareness of what it represented. A single page that began as the final scene, but would become the first chapter of something else entirely. And as she turned to face the cameras, her voice came quiet, measured. This is not about parties or elections or scandals. This is about what happens when someone believes they're too big to be questioned, too powerful to be touched. But the truth? The truth doesn't care who you are. It comes anyway. Fade to black. She didn't say a word. Not as the lights softened. Not as the cameras slowly dimmed. Not as the moderator cleared his throat, then stopped, realizing there was nothing more to host. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to deliver a closing argument. She already had. It sat quietly on the glass desk in front of her, a resignation letter, hastily signed and still drying in ink. Next to it, the purple heart, polished by grief. And beside them both, in a folded sheet of paper, creased, worn, ghosted with the voice of a man who no longer lived but had finally been heard. She looked down at all three and nodded once, not to the crowd, not to the cameras, to the country. Then she turned, walked away, straight-backed, unhurried, alone. The audience didn't clap, not at first, because you don't clap after resurrection. You breathe. The room sat in stunned silence, seconds ticking by like heartbeats rediscovered. Then slowly someone in the back row stood, a man, his hand over his chest, a veteran, then another, a mother, then a teacher, then an immigrant boy holding a folded flag. No chants, no slogans, just the unmistakable sound of people rising, not to cheer, but to stand. Because what had happened here wasn't politics. It wasn't debate. It was memory. It was mourning. It was truth. Delivered not to divide, but to demand that America finally look at itself. And they did. For the first time in years, they did. Because Jasmine hadn't come to destroy a man. She had come to reveal a pattern. She hadn't weaponized her intelligence. She'd channeled her integrity. And the proof of it wasn't in applause or trending hashtags. It was in how many people stood up quietly, hands to their hearts, unsure whether they were grieving or awakening. Someone whispered, "She didn't just speak for the fallen. She woke the living." Outside the chamber, the streets were already swelling. Not with riots or rage, but with focus, with clarity. Screens replayed the final moment across Times Square, Phoenix, Tulsa, Seattle, Detroit. The resignation signature was now etched across front pages, headlines, obituaries of an era. But what people talked about most? Not the confession, not the collapse, but the silence she left behind. How she said nothing, and somehow said everything. The flame was lit now. Not the fire of fury, but of restoration, of questions that could no longer be ignored, of veterans whose names would finally be counted, not just in war, but in truth. Because this wasn't a show. This wasn't scandal. It was a reckoning. And as Jasmine disappeared beyond the curtain, never once looking back, America understood. She hadn't just walked into that chamber to confront a man. She walked in to remind a nation that justice doesn't need permission to knock. And sometimes when it speaks, it whispers first, then lights the match. The end, but not really, because truth doesn't end. It endures, it echoes. It waits for the next folder, the next name, the next reckoning, and it burns on. She didn't leave with applause. She left with a silence that made a nation think. This wasn't about taking down a man. It was about lifting a mirror to a country that forgot how to look. Truth didn't roar. It endured. And when it finally spoke, it didn't ask for permission. It reminded us justice doesn't wear a party, and patriotism isn't obedience. It's courage. If this story stirred something in you, don't scroll. Sit with it, share it, speak on it. Like, comment, and send it to someone who still believes truth deserves a microphone. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where no silence goes unchallenged. Hit the bell because the next chapter isn't safe. It's raw. And it might just change the way you see power. This story is a fictional dramatization, inspired by real injustices and real courage. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental or symbolic for public reflection and critique. Thanks for watching. Justice isn't handed down, it's demanded. This is Harrison Stories.